My name is Anita Randall. I'm 32 years old. And first of all, I want you to understand. I didn't run away from my family. I saved myself from them. Running away would imply fear, desperation, a cowardly impulse in the face of an unbearable situation. But what I did was a conscious, cold, and precise decision, like a surgery. I excised myself from that home like someone removing a tumor. Painful, yes, but with the certainty that it was either that or slowly wither away. My childhood was a long hallway of broken mirrors, each of my reflections distorted by the words of those who, theoretically, were supposed to love me. I grew up constantly reminded that I wasn't enough, that there was always something missing in me, that I could try, study, be proper, and still, I would never be her. Susan, my cousin, the perfect daughter of Aunt Regina and Uncle Almir. Susan, the family's darling. Since childhood, she was treated like some kind of living saint. Her hair sparkled in the sun, her light eyes drew sighs from visitors, and her smile made adults lean in to praise her as if she were a work of art. Everything about her was a reason to celebrate. Everything about me was a reason to correct. I remember once, I must have been around 9. We had all gone to my grandmother's farm for Sunday lunch. I showed up in a blue dress made by my mother with a satin ribbon tied at the waist. I was so happy. I had helped wash the dishes the day before just to earn permission to wear light pink lipstick. When I walked into the living room, hoping for a compliment, my mother just sighed loudly and said, "Susan would look lovely in that dress. You look like a stick insect in it." My father laughed and added, "You lack charm, Anna. Charm is something you're born with. Susan, she was born with a star." I just remember looking at the floor and pulling on the ribbon until it came loose. I felt out of place, like a puzzle piece being forced where it clearly didn't fit. Those small daily aggressions weren't exceptions. They were the rule. When I got a perfect score on the final math exam in school, I was glowing. I ran to the kitchen, report card in hand, heart racing. "Mom, look at this. A 10. The teacher said it was the best exam in the class." She took the paper without much interest, glanced at it, and responded like she was commenting on the weather. Susan passed 3 college subjects with honors. That was it. A dry comparison. Emotionless. As if my achievement had less value because it wasn't hers. My father, hearing the conversation from the other room, still shouted, "Go brush that hair, girl. A pretty woman doesn't even need to be smart." That phrase burned inside me like a branding iron on bare skin. I stood there, frozen, holding a report card that now felt like a blank sheet of paper. I wanted to tear it up. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just went to my room and cried in silence. I learned early that crying in front of them was showing weakness, and they loved when I broke. I had many moments like that, and each one left a mark. The day I won a medal at the science fair, and my mother said I should stop sounding so arrogant when I talk. My 15th birthday, when my party was canceled to help pay for Susan's new exchange program. My high school graduation, where my father walked out halfway through the ceremony because he was too bored by speeches from nerdy students. They pruned me, reduced me, silenced me. But ironically, they also made me more resilient. The first time I thought about leaving home was at 14. But it was just a vague, teenage dream. At 17, I started planning. At 18, I left. I got into college, earned a partial scholarship, rented a tiny room in a shared house, worked during the day, studied at night, sold homemade sweets at school to make ends meet. I didn't ask for help. I never did. And even when I thought about going back, I remembered my mother's voice saying, "You'll never be like Susan." And I'd answer myself, "Thank God." Over the next few years, I cut all ties. Changed my number, blocked social media. To the world, I disappeared. To myself, I was reborn. The only exception was Gabriel, my cousin. Unlike the others, he also carried invisible scars. He was never the athletic son, nor the family role model. Switched majors, had ideas deemed strange, and a sensitivity that made him an easy target for our uncles. We found each other in our silent pain. Sometimes we'd call just to see if the other was still breathing. Gabriel never judged me. Never demanded my presence. He simply existed, like an anchor in rough seas. And that's why, when I got his message on a cold December morning, my phone vibrating on the kitchen counter, I hesitated for a second before opening it. They're getting together for Christmas. They're asking about you. They want you to come. The words cut through me like a sharp knife. Not because they came with resentment, but because they came with expectation. That I would return. That I would forgive. That everything would be wiped clean with fruitcake and cheap wine. I stared at the message like someone looking into a dirty mirror from the past. Reflected there was the face of the girl in the blue dress, ribbon undone, teary-eyed, and a question that had never been answered. Why was I never enough? The 32-year-old Anita took a deep breath and felt a cold curiosity growing inside her. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on. The other wanted to see just how far this family play would go. Was Susan still the star? Would they pretend nothing happened? That I had always been part of the family? My more rational side told me not to get involved. But there was another voice. One that said, go. See it with your own eyes. But not to be accepted. Go to show that you don't need to be anymore. And so I went. I just didn't imagine what would be waiting at the Christmas table. December 24th arrived like a silent wave that suddenly swallowed me whole. I barely noticed the days passing since I'd replied to Gabriel's message with a dry, I'll go. I didn't know if that had been a vote of courage or a sentence. That morning, I opened my closet without overthinking. I chose a matte black dress, fitted at the waist with long sleeves and a clean cut. Minimalist. There were no sparkles, no frills, no extravagance. It was like me, discreet on the outside, but with a presence that cut through the air like a well-polished blade. On my feet, low heels. A thin gold necklace rested on my collarbone, and my hair was pulled into a low, elegant bun. It was armor without steel, made of self-control and silence. As I got ready, I stared at my reflection in the mirror longer than usual. My expression was calm, too calm. But inside, my heart beat heavy and steady like a war drum. It wasn't fear. I had felt fear for years. I knew it well. This was something else. It was vigilance. A state of alertness one develops after walking hostile ground for too long. I got in the car with slightly damp palms, turned on the engine. The route was short, but the journey felt like a crossing. Every kilometer pushed me back into a scene I had worked so hard to dismantle. When I parked in front of my parents' house, something hit me. Nothing had changed. The facade still had peeling paint. The same inflatable Santa Claus sagged on the roof, deflated with time. The lights blinked unevenly, as if unsure whether they should shine. The lawn, poorly trimmed, with dry patches like the relationships inside. The air smelled the same, an overly sweet perfume, my mother's, mixed with the smoke of burnt meat from the barbecue. And underneath it all lingered that invisible tension made of unspoken words, camouflaged resentments, wounds that never found a release valve. I rang the doorbell. My fingers tingled. The door creaked open, and there she was, my mother. She wore a red glittery outfit, heavy makeup. Her smile appeared too quickly to be genuine, and her eyes scanned me like a full-body scanner. Well, the prodigal daughter decided to show up. Her voice dripped sweetness, but every syllable had a thorn. A forced hug followed. Quick, dry, uncomfortable. Her perfume invaded my nose like an unwanted memory. I didn't return the hug with the same enthusiasm. I just let myself be hugged and murmured a quiet, "Hi, Mom." Inside, all eyes turned to me. Those few seconds felt suspended in time, as if they'd paused a play to see who had wandered onto the stage. About 10 people were there. Uncles, cousins, a few tagalongs. Everyone smiled with plastic expressions, like they had rehearsed their reactions but forgot how to hold them after the second glance. My father sat at the head of the dining room table, beer in hand, his polo shirt stretched over his belly. When he saw me, he raised an eyebrow, eyeing me from head to toe with unnecessary slowness. He gave a crooked smile, then said, "You look different. Had some work done?" The words hit me like a door slamming in my face, so predictable, so mediocre. I pretended not to hear. just gave a polite smile and moved toward the couch, where Gabriel was already waiting for me with that knowing look only someone who's bled from the same family wounds can give. "You're really crazy," he muttered, barely moving his lips. "I know," I whispered back, half smiling. The living room decor hadn't changed in 10, maybe 15 years. The same chipped porcelain nativity on the shelf. Red and gold ornaments hung on a fake tree, slanted to one side like it was tired of so many bad Christmases. And of course, picture frames with Susan in every angle. Debutante, graduation, trips. A timeline of borrowed pride. We sat at the table. Lavish, as always. They knew how to make it look like everything was perfect. Turkey, rice with raisins, chicken salad, farofa, cheap wine. The food was the only acceptable excess, a way to cover the silences, the emptiness, the averted gazes. Everyone chatted about surface-level things. Their words tripped over familiar cliches. Traffic, gas prices, the new 9 o'clock soap. I listened, but didn't speak. I observed, like someone watching a documentary about endangered species. The mood was tense, but everyone faked it well. The smiles were rehearsed. The questions came wrapped in thinly veiled judgment. So, dating anyone, or still alone? Ever think about moving back here? Life out there must be so impersonal, right? Don't you get tired of that workaholic life and no family? Each line was like a butter knife trying to cut me, but I didn't bleed anymore. And then came gift time. My mother handed out the packages with exaggerated cheer, passing out carefully labeled parcels. To Susan, with love. To Uncle Almir, with affection. To Ana Luisa, our little one. The pile of gifts shrank slowly, in between hugs and kisses, torn paper and forced smiles. When only a few packages remained, a quiet pause fell over the room. My father cleared his throat, tapped his fork against a glass. And now, for our Anita. A dramatic pause. All eyes turned to me. "Well, we forgot about you. What a shame, daughter." He let out a laugh. That laugh. The same one from years ago when he mocked anything I achieved. It was like being transported back in time, sitting at that Sunday table again, with a trophy in my hand and a hole in my chest. His laugh echoed through the room. No one laughed with him, but no one stopped him either. The pain didn't hit immediately. It came quietly, like a leak. A slow trickle running down the inner walls of my chest. I smiled, but inside a part of me wilted, not out of surprise but out of confirmation. They hadn't changed, and I hadn't expected them to. But still, it hurt. Not because of the gift, but because of what that forgetting symbolized. It was a reaffirmation that even there, even as an adult, even successful, I was still invisible to them. The pain morphed into a bitter blend of anger and clarity. I swallowed hard, kept my posture, looked straight at my father, and then spoke, with a calmness that bordered on cruel. "It's okay, Dad. You forgetting about me is a tradition." The silence that followed was brutal. My mother stopped chewing. One of the cousins fiddled with his phone, pretending not to notice. Someone coughed. Susan, impeccable as ever, lowered her gaze to her plate, uncomfortable. Gabriel beside me let out a short, muffled laugh, like someone silently applauding. In that pause, in that heavy stillness, I realized the power I held. They thought they could shove me back into the old role, the bitter, quiet girl on the sidelines. But they were about to learn I wasn't the same Anita anymore. And this time, I wouldn't bow. During lunch, the clinking of cutlery against porcelain was almost a soundtrack of contained tension. The laughter came in short bursts, forced like canned laughter from a TV show. Conversations skimmed the surface of everything: the weather forecast, Uncle Almir's new car, the reality show cousin Ana Luisa watched religiously. No one dared dive deep into any topic. It was as if everyone feared that the slightest detour would reveal the cracks in a carefully maintained facade. The smell of stuffed turkey with dried fruit farofa lingered in the air, mixed with my mother's overpowering perfume, a sweet and suffocating blend that reminded me of my entire adolescence. I was about to take a sip of wine when Aunt Regina, always her, with that inquisitive air disguised as curiosity, leaned slightly over the table and, in the most casual tone she could muster, asked, "And you, Anita, what is it you do for work again?" The question flew across the table like an arrow. Small, quick, precise. My mother, seated to my left, reached out as if trying to extinguish a match before it turned into a fire. "Oh, Regina, did you see how beautiful the tree looks this year? Susan helped decorate it." But I had already turned to face my aunt, smiling with the same serenity I'd used years ago when I walked out the front door without ever looking back. "I'm the founder of a digital solutions company. It's called Brightcore Systems. We just closed a contract with a European multinational, a 5-year expansion project. We're hiring now, growing." I spoke slowly. The words were clear, sharp, like well-honed blades. There was no arrogance in my tone, only certainty. The kind of certainty they never granted me. The certainty of someone who built an empire without a single brick of family support. For a second, time seemed to stop. Spoons hung in the air. Chewing ceased. Even the air conditioner's fan seemed to slow down. I saw eyebrows raise like waves ready to crash. Uncle Almir widened his eyes, and Cousin Ana Luisa, who had been distractedly scrolling through her phone, looked up with almost childlike interest. My mother stretched her lips into a tense smile, the kind that only reaches half the face. And then, of course, Aunt Regina furrowed her brow, narrowing her eyes. "But does that actually make money?" It was like a snap in the air. The question wasn't genuine, it was accusatory. As if the very possibility of success outside their traditional script was, in itself, an offense. Before I could respond, Susan, impeccable in a cream linen blazer and makeup so precise it looked hand-painted, leaned forward and said, with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Wow, that's different. I could never see myself doing something like that. I prefer stability, you know? Something more classic." Classic. The word made me want to laugh. As if I were a risky bet, and she, the safe investment. Then my father cleared his throat. Loud, deliberate. "Well, if things are going so great, right, honey? Maybe you could help the family. Your Uncle Ernest is in some serious debt. That issue with the consortium, remember? And your cousin Leticia wants to study abroad. She's only short about 5,000. Just a little something for someone landing European contracts, right?" The sentence fell over the table like a heavy veil. That was the reason. It wasn't longing. It never was. They didn't invite me because they missed me. Their surprise wasn't genuine pride or respect. They called me back because now I was useful. Useful in a way I never was when I sought their approval. Now that I no longer needed it, they were suddenly rediscovering my value, with dollar signs in their eyes. I took a deep breath. Let the silence stretch longer than necessary. I wanted it to become uncomfortable. I wanted it to seep through the cracks in the false harmony they had worked so hard to maintain. Then I spoke, with clarity, with firmness, without raising my voice, because truth spoken calmly wounds more than any shout. "No, I can't help financially." A pause. Long enough for the expressions around me to begin to shift. An eyebrow arched, a jaw clenched, a fork clattered onto a plate with a metallic thud. And more than that, I don't want to. The reaction was instant. My mother shifted in her seat, adjusting her blouse as if trying to hide inside it. My father furrowed his brow. Aunt Regina let out an indignant sigh, as if ready to quote from the gospel of good family values. But I continued. "For years, you all made it clear I was the failure. The weird one. The one who should keep her head down. Susan was the role model, the star, and I was the mistake that wasn't supposed to shine." I turned my face toward each of them, looking them in the eyes, holding the gaze just a second longer with each one. No rush, no retreat. "But now that I've become something you never expected, now that I'm a version of success that didn't come from your mold, you think you can use me like a walking ATM? Just because I'm here and the balance in my bank account is more interesting than my story?" My mother raised her hand, trying to contain the damage growing like wildfire. Her voice came out shaky, still trying to sound motherly. "Anita, my dear, you're overreacting." But I cut her off, with the coldness that years of silence had taught me. "No, Mom, I'm not overreacting. I'm just telling the truth. A truth you've refused to hear my entire life. You taught me from a young age that love was conditional on usefulness, that worth was based on what someone could provide." I paused for a moment, so each word could sink in like a bitter pill without water. "And today, now that I'm no longer the little girl begging for attention, you want to pull me back. But I'm not for sale. I'm not a bailout. And I'm not going to pay for anyone else's broken dreams." The silence that followed was the loudest of my life. It was dense, as if the air had been swallowed by the room. No one moved, no one even dared chew. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, that old dark wooden one, marking not just the time, but the years of hypocrisy. And then, someone cried. The sound was quiet, a muffled sob, as if the emotion had slipped out without permission. But I didn't turn my head. I didn't look to see who it was, because at that moment, it didn't matter. My truth had been spoken, unveiled, planted at the center of that table like a precision bomb. And somehow, even with my heart racing, even with my muscles tight, I felt lighter than I ever had in that house. Because for the first time, I was seen, but not in the way they wanted. In the way I chose to be. It was an almost imperceptible sound at first. A muffled hiss, contained, seeming to come from an indistinct point in the room. In the middle of that frozen silence, it was like the crack of a fracture in a solid surface. Subtle, but with the potential to bring everything down. I looked toward the sound. It was my Aunt Regina. Her shoulders were hunched, hands clasped in her lap, and her teary eyes shimmered under the warm lights of the Christmas tree. The tears rolled down quietly, trying not to draw attention, as if even her crying carried shame. She tried to hide it, sniffling softly, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her dress. But it was there, exposed. Her crying wasn't because of what I had said, but for everything she had never had the courage to say. For everything she had kept quiet. For the cowardice she recognized in herself when she heard me speak. It was the crying of someone who saw her own prison reflected in another person who dared to escape it. Susan, sitting a few feet from me, was paralyzed. Her hands rested one over the other in her lap, her fingers unmoving. Her eyes stared at an undefined spot on the tablecloth, as if the repetitive embroidery could save her from the discomfort. Her mouth was slightly open, as if something wanted to come out. An apology, maybe? An accusation? But nothing came. For the first time in my life, Susan was silent in front of me. And that silence hurt more than any word. My father, to my right, hadn't said a single word. He looked down at his plate, where the food remnants were beginning to dry, and let out a long sigh, like an old weight had finally sunk into him. The man who had so often used sarcasm as a shield now looked old, small. Shrinking into his wrinkled shirt, he ran a hand behind his neck, cleared his throat, but didn't have the courage to lift his face. His silence was different from Susan's. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything he had always tried to deny. That he underestimated me, that he hurt me, that maybe he had indeed been wrong. My mother was the only one to move. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping across the wooden floor. For a second, I thought she was going to say something, throw one of her barbed phrases into the air, the ones sweetened with honey but laced with poison. But no, she simply walked away, went down the hall without saying a word. The sound of her heels echoed until it disappeared into the kitchen. The gesture, though restrained, carried desperation, as if something in her had broken, and she didn't know what to do with the shards. I stayed there. Still, not like someone who had won, but like someone who could finally breathe. My shoulders were relaxed, the tension dissolved. For the first time in years, I wasn't trapped inside myself. The words had come out. Clear, bare, firm. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of necessity. A release that didn't expect an echo, just liberation. Like pulling a thorn from flesh that had already scarred. A simple gesture, but a decisive one. Gabriel, sitting to my left, leaned in slowly. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the center of the table, as if honoring a loss. But his voice came in a whisper, hoarse with restrained emotion. "That's what you needed, right?" I didn't hesitate. I just nodded, feeling a small knot in my chest loosen. "Not for revenge," I said, "but for freedom." He gave a small, subtle smile, full of understanding. No one else in that room knew, but Gabriel knew everything. He knew about the torn diaries, the locked doors, the panic attacks hidden in the bathroom. He knew what it had cost me to build a life that now felt real enough to make others uncomfortable. Time seemed to stretch. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if they were all waiting for the next scene, but no one knew the script. That's when my mother came back. She walked more slowly now, without the heels, in slippers. Her hair pulled back hastily, as if she had given up maintaining appearances. Her red eyes betrayed recent crying, and yet there was a strange serenity in her face, or perhaps resignation. In her hand she held a manila envelope, thick, crumpled at the corners. She stopped 2 steps from me, not sitting down. She extended the envelope as if it weighed more than it should. "It's..." Her voice cracked. She took a deep breath, trying to find steadiness. "Some photos from your childhood. I thought you might want them." I blinked slowly. The simple gesture caught me off guard. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't an attack either. It was human. And coming from her, that was worth more than any present under the tree. I reached out and received the envelope carefully. Our fingers touched for a moment, and she didn't pull away. "Thank you," I murmured, with a sincere weight in my voice. I didn't promise anything. Not closeness, not forgiveness. But I thanked her. Because in that moment, the gesture was real. She bit her lower lip as if she wanted to ask something, but hesitated, until she finally spoke. "Are you leaving?" The question had more layers than it seemed. It wasn't just about that night. It was about everything, about leaving years ago, about not coming back, about no longer fitting there. I breathed slowly. My eyes scanned the room one last time, the framed photos of Susan, the blinking lights out of sync, the faces still marked by surprise, discomfort, realization. "Yes," I replied. "I still have a life out there, and it no longer fits in here." There was no immediate reaction, just silent acceptance, like when someone realizes, too late, that they've lost something they didn't even know they were trying to hold on to. I stood up slowly, picking up my bag and the envelope of photos. Gabriel stood with me, as if he knew this was the final act. Susan looked away. My father remained motionless. Aunt Regina wiped her eyes, now with more freedom. I walked toward the door, steps firm, light, without urgency. When I opened it, the night breeze came in like a blessing. Outside, the street was quiet. Some houses had colorful lights. A dog barked in the distance. And then, there, on the edge between past and present, between the girl I once was and the woman I had become, I paused for a moment. I wondered if I should look back. For a second, I was tempted. Just to see, one last time, the setting where so many of my wounds were born. But no. I walked out of that house without looking back. And it was in that simple gesture of moving forward without needing to confirm the impact of my absence that I felt, with absolute clarity, that something in me had changed forever. But as I walked to the car, the envelope pressed to my chest, a strange feeling began to grow, like a shadow at the corner of my eye, a subtle yet persistent premonition, because even though that chapter was closed, some messages still waited for me on the way. In the days following the dinner, the echoes of that night continued to ripple through my life like the distant sound of an explosion, muffled but persistent. The immediate tension was gone, no more urgency in the eyes or trembling in the hands, but the reverberations were everywhere. First came the messages, Small, sporadic, but heavy with a weight disguised as lightness. As if, after everything that had been said, and the silence that followed, there was still a clumsy attempt to patch the unpatchable. The first came 2 days later, at 8:37 a.m. It was from my uncle Almir. A simple, "Hi, Anita, how are you? Maybe we could talk sometime." No punctuation at the end. As if the sentence itself was uncertain of its own legitimacy. He had never messaged me before, not on my birthdays, not when he found out I was living abroad. And now, after so many years, he shows up with a, "Maybe we could talk?" I had talked to myself so much during the years I needed to escape that house. Talking to him felt like regression. I didn't reply. At 11:10, another notification. Aunt Regina. "Anita, your mother is really shaken. She knows she was wrong, but doesn't know how to say it. You could make it easier." Make it easier. The phrase hit me like a slap with a dirty glove. I'd spent my life making things easier so everyone else could feel comfortable, except me. I made it easier when I swallowed humiliation, when I was compared to Susan, when my effort was reduced to teenage rebellion. I made it so easy I nearly disappeared. Now I was stone, silent, unmovable. I just left it on red. At 2:22 p.m. that same day, the notification that made my stomach knot. Susan. The message was a short paragraph. Just enough to carry a ton of contradictions. "You could try to reconnect. We're family after all. Everything that was said, it was in the heat of the moment. I think we all crossed the line. I know I was never easy with you, but you were always so different. Sometimes it felt like you liked to fight. I just want to understand if there's still a way to fix this. Susan." I read it 3 times. Slower each time. The tone was sweet on the surface, but slipped through a thin layer of disguised guilt. The words came as if I were equally responsible for the collapse of our relationship, as if my pain had been equal to hers, as if our sins carried the same weight. I thought about not replying. For hours, I left the phone aside. I showered, made coffee, read a passage from a book about rebuilding. But her message kept simmering under my skin, like a wound that still tingled. At 6:46 p.m., I replied, "Family is who respects you. Blood ties without respect are just biology." Simple, no insult, no room for debate. She read it less than a minute later, went online, typing, stopped, disappeared, no reply. That night, the most unexpected message arrived. My father. It took me a moment to recognize the number. It wasn't saved. The message came with the tone of someone trying to appear smaller than they were, a false humility, awkward as a cheap suit. "Hi, daughter. I know I'm far from the father you deserved. I really want to talk to you, to apologize. I know I messed everything up. Let me call you, just for a few minutes." I stared at the screen for a long time. The word daughter struck me as foreign, as if he had borrowed it from somewhere else, because in the last 2 decades he had barely used it. And when he did, it sounded like obligation, not affection. I knew that part of me still longed to hear him say, "I'm proud of you," as if that could heal what had eaten away at me for so long. But now I was an adult, a CEO, a woman, a survivor. The childlike need inside me no longer ran the show. I blocked the number. Not out of resentment. Not for revenge. But because I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't require coexistence. That loving from afar can also be an act of love. For yourself. And that my peace, finally built with effort and pain that no one in that house ever saw, would no longer depend on the approval of someone who never knew how to love me fully. That's when Lucas came home. I was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, a glass of wine in hand, the brown envelope with the photos beside me. The room light was dim, and the instrumental playlist played soft piano in the background, as if my life now had a soundtrack. He walked in, took off his coat, and set down his backpack with the care of someone who understands the weight of days. He sat beside me without saying a word. We stayed in silence for a while. He took my hand, gave it a gentle squeeze, as if saying, "You don't have to explain." Still, he asked, in a low voice, almost a whisper, as if not wanting to disturb the air around us. Did you do what you needed to? I looked at him, and I saw him in a way I'd never seen anyone in my family. Grounded, present, whole. A man who didn't try to fix me. Who loved me as I arrived, went with cracks, with scars, with a soul still under renovation. I did. He nodded, waited. And then, with the ease of someone who already knows the answer, but still wants to hear it. And now, I smiled. A new smile, weightless. Now I move on. We sat there, hands entwined, the sound of the piano filling the space. The house was small, but it felt like the world, and in that moment everything I'd left behind was just distant noise. No regrets, no doubt, just certainty. Today, I'm sitting in my office, and for a moment everything feels suspended, as if time is holding its breath. The walls around me don't shout status, they whisper history. A deep green covers the back wall, contrasting with the light wood of the wide desk where papers rest, neatly organized in linen folders, and a large mug with the phrase, "I made chaos home." The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixes with the light scent of the peace lily that bloomed this morning, there in the sunniest corner of the room. To my left, a wooden bookshelf holds books that have shaped me more than any relative ever tried. Audre Lorde, Simone de Beauvoir, bell hooks, voices that, at some point, taught me that anger can become fuel, and pain, if well cared for, turns into a map. Hanging on the wall is a framed cover of the magazine where I appeared last month. Anita Randall, the CEO who built an empire without asking permission. I still find that title strange. CEO, empire, without asking permission. But it's true. I did that. Behind the half-open door, the team's sounds echo like casual music. Laughter, inside jokes, the clatter of keyboards speeding up as the campaign deadline approaches. At some point in my story, I believed I would never be enough for anyone to trust me. Today, 38 women and 2 well-intentioned men work with me, look me in the eyes, and listen. Because they know that here, the rule is simple. Respect is not asked for. It is demanded. My phone vibrates, a notification from Lucas. I made eggplant lasagna and wine. Come hungry. And with soul. I smile to myself. He doesn't know it, but messages like this save me every day from little ghosts. Lucas doesn't try to heal me, doesn't try to save me. He just walks with me. And that, for someone taught to expect love with pain, is revolutionary. But then, the thought comes. Like a wave that, even gentle, still wets the feet. My parents. They remain where they always were. Still, in their convictions as solid as concrete, but full of cracks inside. Now and then, I get messages from Susan saying that Mom has been quieter, that Dad asks about me like someone trying to remember a dream. I listen, I thank, but I don't go back. Because it's not about resentment. It's about sanity. Sometimes, on a silent morning like this, old phrases come back, like night insects drawn to the light of the present. I hear the dry sound of my dad's laugh when I mentioned wanting to study marketing. Marketing? What are you going to sell? Illusion? And my mother, with that sweet yet passive-aggressive tone, when I talked about the internship, "Daughter, that's not a job. That's a game for people who don't have bills to pay." I remember the discomfort between the lines, the constant comparison to Susan, the doctor, the responsible one, the one who made it, the one who knew when to speak, to smile, to cross her legs elegantly and not question. Yes, I still remember. But now, it doesn't hurt. Now those memories have the density of wet paper. Once heavy, but today they fall apart in my hands. They only remind me of where I came from. And above all, they remind me of the strength it took not to go back there. Because the truth is, I refused. I refused to be just another copy. I refused to smile while bleeding. I refused to fit into a mold that was never made for me. And it's curious to think that, in the end, I didn't scream. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't throw truths like knives in anyone's face. I just made them look. The truth was there, clear, like a broken mirror where everyone could see themselves. But only I moved forward, even knowing the reflected image was uncomfortable. They didn't. They retreated, hid behind old certainties. And that was the greatest revenge. Showing them that everything they said I wouldn't be, I was. Better yet, that everything they said wasn't worth being, was exactly what saved me. A gentle knock at the door interrupts my thoughts. It's Amanda, my creative manager. 32 years old, black like me, with the serious expression of someone who takes care of what she loves. Sorry to interrupt you, Anita? Never. She comes in with a tablet in her hand and eyes shining. The new campaign got approved, and the client cried, for real. We smile together. She sits for a moment, sighs, and says, you know, right? That all this isn't just work, it's something else. It's survival turned into structure, I reply, and a structure that shelters other survivors. She nods, silent, but with gratitude in her eyes. When she leaves, I set the tablet aside and open my podcast audio recorder. I hadn't planned to record today, but some things don't wait. I adjust the microphone, look out the window where the sun draws golden lines on the desk, and start. Today, I want to speak to you who grew up hearing you were too much, that you talked too much, that you dreamed too much, that you were too sensitive, that you were too angry, that you would never be someone if you didn't learn to behave. I heard that my whole life, and for a long time I believed it. I diminished myself to fit what was expected. I did everything to please, to be accepted. But then one day, I discovered that living apologizing for being who you are is dying slowly. So I stopped, and I started building. Brick by brick, a space where no one told me to be quiet, where I could be a woman, black, intense, firm, without hiding. A space where others like me could come in, breathe, and understand they are not wrong for existing with strength. And if you're listening to this now, know this. You're not too much. You're just surrounded by too few people. People who never had the courage to be who you are. People who are bothered by your freedom because they sold their own for scraps of acceptance. Today, I'm 32. And no one will ever diminish me again. Never again. I end the recording and let silence fill the room for a moment. A good silence. Full. The kind of silence only those who have made peace with their own voice can hear without fear. I stand up slowly, grab my bag, the light linen jacket, and my phone. Lucas sent another message. The wine is just right, and so am I. I reply with a heart emoji and leave. On the way to the elevator, I pass two interns laughing at some inside joke. One looks at me and says, Anita, do you have a minute? I stop, smile. I have all the time you need. She hesitates, her eyes slightly misty. Thank you for this, for the company, for the space, for existing. I lightly touch her shoulder. Thank you for staying. The elevator arrives. I get in. And as it goes down, I think, being strong was never about winning a war. It was about stopping the fight for love where there was never room for me. It was about building what I was never given, and now I give that to others. Because I am living proof that when we stop accepting less, the world finally understands our worth and starts calling us by the right name. And if you enjoyed this powerful story of female revenge, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. There's lots of twists, emotion, and justice coming your way. Oh, click on the video that's appearing on your screen now to watch another breathtaking revenge story. The next story might be even more intense. See you there.